Sourdough bread is one of my favorite things on earth. I like to use whole grain, organic, stone milled flours. And with sourdough, you capture wild bacteria and yeast that through lactic acid fermentation gives a nutritious and distinctly sour flavor to the bread. Any sourdough bread adventure begins with a starter. You can usually buy a small bit of starter from your local artisan bakery, or you can get it from a friend or grow your own. The leaven is the cornerstone of the bread making process. The leaven is a mixture of flour, water, and your starter. By allowing this mixture to ferment before you create the dough, you bring an abundance of flavor and aroma to your bread. For the leaven, start with 100 grams of your preferred flour. I'm using a whole grain spelt flour. Add a dollop of your starter. I use a heaping tablespoon. This doesn't need to be exact. You can use your starter straight from the fridge as long as it was fed recently. To this flour and starter, add 100 grams of filtered water at about 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, this doesn't need to be exact. Mix everything until no lumps remain, cover with a dish towel, and leave it at room temperature for about 8 to 12 hours. Autolyse is a process that hydrates the flour, which activates the flour's enzymes and encourages gluten development. Not all bakers autolyse their dough, but it makes the dough easier to work with, especially if you're using whole grain flours. To autolyse your dough, measure 500 grams of your flour into a bowl. I use a 50-50 blend of a sifted whole grain bread flour and an unsifted whole grain flour. The materials that make up my house expand and contract at different rates, so when my house cools at night, these materials move against each other and make noises. To the flour, add 375 grams of filtered water at about 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Mix with your hands or a dough whisk until no dry lumps remain. Cover with a dish towel and let rest for at least 45 minutes and up to 2 hours. Longer is better. After autolysing, we're going to mix in the leaven and let it rest. Measure out about 120 grams of your leaven. Store the remainder in the fridge for later use. This is usable for the next week or so. Just make sure to bring it to room temperature before using again. Set a timer for 3 minutes and squeeze in the leaven, pinching and pulling the dough. After the 3 minutes are up, let the dough rest for 3 minutes. Add another 50 to 75 grams of water to the dough. I use about 60 grams. Mix again for 3 minutes and then let it rest for 3 more minutes. They live outside. Measure 10 to 15 grams of fine sea salt and scatter it over the surface of the resting dough. Splash in a little more water, enough to keep loosening the dough, then mix for another 3 minutes. Next, cover the bowl with a tea towel and let it rest in a warmish place for 30 to 45 minutes. You'll now give your dough some time to bulk ferment, which is a process that allows the dough to rise. Keep a careful eye on this stage as it can easily overproof, which will completely ruin everything you've worked so hard for in your life. I'm just kidding. With your covered dough resting in a warmish place, turn the dough every 30 to 45 minutes by wetting your hands and stretching and folding each side inward. Repeat this a few times. Make sure to pop any large bubbles in the dough during this process. Proofing is the second fermentation of your dough. I do my final proofing overnight in the fridge. The cold slows down the fermentation and allows for a more flexible baking schedule if you don't wish to bake your bread right away. I'm so tired all the time. You can alternatively proof your dough for 2 to 4 hours at room temperature. The higher the temperature, the faster the dough will proof. Once your dough is proofed, lightly oil your loaf pan, or you can line it with parchment paper like I do. This makes it a lot easier to remove from the pan later. Move your proofed dough to the loaf pan as a gentle guided pour. Cover it with a tea towel or some linen and allow it to ferment in the fridge overnight or until the dough is nearly risen to the top of the pan. Now that your dough is proofed, you're ready to bake it. Preheat your oven to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Score the top of the dough with a blade or a bread lame. This will help the bread bake more evenly and open up as it heats. I cover my loaf pan with a second loaf pan to create a cast iron steam within the pan. Loaf pans don't typically come with a lid like Dutch ovens do, so this is my trick for creating the same steaming atmosphere, which makes for a moister loaf. With your dough scored and covered, place it in the preheated oven for about 25 minutes. After your timer goes off, remove the second loaf pan on top, rotate the pan, turn the heat down to 450 to 475 degrees Fahrenheit, and bake for another 25 to 30 minutes. Once your timer goes off, remove your freshly baked loaf from the oven. Thank you. Remove the loaf from its pan and let it cool completely for at least 2 to 4 hours on a wire rack before slicing and cutting it.
Ah!